Welcome! Pull up a chair, get some popcorn, sit by the fire, get some nice cozy cocoa. Even though it's summertime, cocoa is still an excellent drink. I'm just gonna say that. Alright, so there's like 79 pages, so yay for us, but also story time! Okay. Of course I can't read cursive. Well, the frog earns the right to speak. I think I already read this, but we're just gonna read it again. That way the book is all in one episode. Okay, ready? Ready? Sit your butt down! Once upon a time, in an ancient and deep forest, there lived a big frog in a small pond. She was a peaceful creature who spent most of her time eating, swimming, and sleeping. From the morning to the evening, she did everything the smaller frogs did, except she did it bigger. She ate more, she jumped further, she was smarter, and she made much more noise. Everybody in the forest could hear her loud croaking, and everyone was happy that they could. You see, it was easy to get lost in the forest, but thanks to the frog's loud noise, you could just as easily find your way back to her pond. Maybe it would not have been the same if the big frog had kept singing during the night, but she was much too lazy an animal to stay active after dark. One day, an unknown visitor came to the forest for the first time. It was a young woman dressed in a beautiful gown. She was walking fast through the woods as if she was running away, and she never looked back. Many eyes spied the princess pass by, but no one dared to help her, for the Mad Hatter was on her trail. This is not our business, they said, and we had better look away, for the Mad Hatter was an unwieldy man who loved nothing but hunting down prey for money and glory. Nothing could escape his piercing eye for long. So the princess walked alone without help until she was hopelessly lost in the big forest. Exhausted, she pushed on with no idea of where she was heading as the hunter drew closer, dodging his pursuit. She continued this way until she heard a heavy croaking far off to the left. So clear and loud, the princess immediately made for the source of the noise. A few minutes later, she reached the big frog in the small pond, and the frog looked at her with a gentle smile. "Help me, please," the princess said. "I need a place to rest and hide." "Ribbit!" The frog and the princess frowned. "Please stop making noise. The Mad Hatter is after me." "Ribbit!" The frog again, so loud that the princess had to cover her ears. The creature began to jump every which way. "What are you doing?" asked the princess. "Stop all that noise, or he will find us." But the frog kept croaking and jumping around her left and right, up and down. "Ribbit, ribbit!" until the princess understood the meaning of all the fuss. Cautiously, the woman climbed on the back of the big animal, and in a leap, the frog set off away from the pond. The frog jumped so high and so far that even the Mad Hatter hunter could not find where the princess had gone. With a few jumps, the princess was out of his piercing eye. A few jumps more, and she vanished for good. The princess closed her eyes and let her clever mount carry her wherever the creature pleased. Less than an hour later, the big frog had reached the other side of the ancient forest, near the shores of a very deep lake. There, she landed without a noise in front of a big wooden house that had been abandoned. "Thank you," the princess, covering the animal's snout with kisses. "I only wish you could speak, so I would have understood what you were trying to do sooner." As she pronounced those words, something incredible happened. The big frog was suddenly able to speak. Her words startled the princess. "The Mad Hatter is always at my heels. Now you're safe, and I've had my revenge. You can stay in this house. It has been abandoned for a long time, and no one will look for you here." And then, without looking back, the big frog jumped back to the pond. And this is how the big frog saved the princess, and how she earned her right to speak. Once upon a time, in an ancient and deep forest, the old bear stood on the brink of a river, swiping at salmon on their way up to the spawning grounds. Just as he got his paws on a particularly fat one, he heard a woman shouting for help. He considered simply eating his salmon, but then she screamed again, and he lumbered over to investigate. After a short walk, he found the princess clinging to the top of a tree, while a wolf snarled and snapped at the base of the tree. Old Bear would normally not get in the middle of such a situation. After all, as a fellow predator, he understood the wolves need to hunt. But when he saw the princess, he was struck by her beauty, and he knew he had to help. With a giant roar, the bear heaved onto his hind legs, rising to his full height. The wolf snapping and snarled in his direction, but the bear roared again, and the wolf took off into the trees, tail between his legs. The old bear fell back onto all fours and stared up at the princess. She regarded him faithfully. "You can calm down now," he said. "How do I know you didn't save me just so you can eat me yourself?" asked the princess. "I suppose that's a fair question," admitted the old bear, "but I promise you I won't eat you." The princess had no reason to trust the old bear, except that he had kind eyes, and so she slowly made her way down the tree. When she reached the ground, the bear only watched her, and so she supposed there was not going to be eaten today. "Thank you," she told the old bear. "Of course. And can I walk you back to your home?" "Of course." And so the princess and the old bear walked together through the forest back to the big wooden house. After that, the princess would occasionally find gifts from the bear: a fresh-cut salmon, a handful of ripe berries, a new bloomed bluebell. One spring, when a sudden thaw flooded the path out of the princess' home, the old bear was there, and she rode him back across the river. The old bear began to think that the princess should be his mate. After all, she had no mate, and she needed one, and he could keep her warm and provide her a much more suitable den, and catch fish for her and protect her from wolves. She, in turn, would brush out his fur and pick berries without smushing half of them, and scratch that one part of his back he couldn't reach. And with how she took care of the goblins, she would be an excellent mother for his cubs. One day, the old bear came with a ring of spruce and asked the princess to be his bride. "I'm sorry," the princess said. "You are a very good friend, and I appreciate all you have done for me, but I can't marry you. You're a bear. I'm a princess. It would never work." The old bear was crushed. "Can we still be friends?" he asked. "We will always be friends," said the princess. "But I will never marry you." The old bear and the princess carried on their friendship, and after 1 year he tried again to ask her to be his bride, but once again she refused him. This happened 1 year later, and 1 year after that, and then finally the princess said, "Old bear, you are my dear friend, and I appreciate all you have done for me, but I would sooner have you left me to the wolves than marry you. And that is how it will always be. I have my hands full with 2 goblins who live under my house, and they are all I need." That wounded the old bear deeply, but it was final enough to stop his proposals. They remained friends, and he continued to give her gifts of fresh salmon and ripe berries and newly bloomed bluebells, but the old bear never asked the princess to be his bride, as much as he would have wanted to. And that is how the princess befriended the old bear, and how she refused him. Okay. See, this is what I mean about being like a backstory for the mom. So is this the mom is the princess? Because she talks about goblins under her house, wherever that, who live under the house, and that's all they need. Well, the kids keep on referring to themselves as goblins, or Allison and Taylor do. So that's the kids, and then the princess is the mom. And so I wonder if the old bear is like the sheriff or someone like that. Like, I wonder if each character in the book is an actual character in the town. The beaver leaves the house, finds the house. Once upon a time, in an ancient and deep forest, there lived a wise princess in a big wooden house. One night, a particular violent storm shook the house. It shook the shingles on the roof and the planks in the walls. It even shook the beams on which the house stood, blowing the whole thing near to the ground. The princess hid in the closet, fearing the house would come down on her as she slept. In the morning, the house was still standing, but it was badly damaged. The storm had blown shingles off the roof and planks off the walls, and even bent a post upon which the house stood. The first 2 things she could fix, but the last one concerned her. What will I do? Desperate, the wise princess, for though she knew many things, she did not know how to fix the big wooden house. Just then, the old bear came by to see if the princess had any trouble in the storm. When he found her nailing planks back into place, he said, "Stop, princess, let me do it for you." "I'd happy to," said the princess, "but if you want to help with the roof, you may." "Oh, I'm happy to do it." Read that wrong. When the pair were done with the roof and the walls, they examined the bent post. "I could throw my body against it," said the old bear. "I'm very large." He stretched up onto his hind legs, being sure the princess could appreciate how very large he was, then traced straight to the post. He threw his body against it with an impressive thud. The impact made the post bent too far, and it ended up bent the other direction. The wise princess decided more precision was needed, and she thought then of the very old beaver who kept an excellent craft dam. Perhaps she can help. She went looking for the very old beaver and found the industrious animal hard at work slapping down mud on part of her dam that had been blown apart in the storm. Most of the structure was unharmed because the beaver was very good at building things. The princess knew she had came to the right place. "Beaver," she said, "my house is damaged in the storm. Would you help me fix it?" "I'd believe I can do that, yes, said the very old beaver, and she paused at fixing her own dam to follow the princess. The very old beaver examined the wooden house and nodded. It will be an easy feat, she said, and she set about riding the post with a loud slap of her tail. When she was done, the wise princess stroked the beaver's head. Thank you, Beaver, she said. The wind blew the shingles off the roof and the planks off the wall, even bent this post. Now thanks to you I shall have a home. Think nothing of it, said the old beaver, who returned to her work on her own dam once again. That winter the very old beaver grew ill, very ill. She was not able to fix her dam nor to gather food. When the princess found out, she set about delivering meals to the beaver. She brought stews of corns and beans and basketfuls of bark and twigs from the beaver's favorite aspen. One day the wise princess noticed that the beaver's dam had begun to fall apart. She set about fixing it, though she was not as talented as the very old beaver. The fix kept the creature warm and dry. Thank you, said the very old beaver. Of course, said the princess. You helped me when the storm blew my house near to the ground. Thanks to you, I shall have a home, and I'm happy to do the same. The princess continued to nurse the old beaver until the day she came to the dam, and the forest was still. No birds sung, no branches rustled, no small things skittered within the underbrush. Oh, the princess stared sadly at the dam, for she knew the old beaver had passed on. Goodbye, my friend. And that is how the very old beaver saved the big wooden house. Now the wise princess repaid her kindness. These stories are not really happy for being like a child's book. Once upon a time, in a deep and ancient forest, backwards, but okay, the princess was meticulously because happy because it was a 1-year anniversary of when she had ran away from home. Sensing her sadness, her forest friends showed up at her door. They were headed by the Pelican, precise and attentive, and organized by the moose, Stillwood and Foreshot. The old bear was there with his claws so sharp, as well as the big frog puttering away, even the heighty muskrat, who almost never had time for anyone who came. The bear invited her to ride on his back, promising no wolf would hurry her path, and then the animals led her to the fairy glen, where the fabulous party had been prepared. There was a banquet of seafood, and the pelican had served from her never-emptying beak. The air was filled with twinkling fairy lights. The moose had arranged after clouds filled with the sky, and the gracious frog mixed up frozy drinks. Only the muskrat had nothing in particular, munching off everyone else's hard work. The princess had a very good time at our party, such a good time that she forgot to say thank you to any of her friends. Noticing this, the fairies decided a bit of mischief. When the princess went to open her gifts, she found 3 identical boxes at the edge of the glen. Puzzled, she turned back and gasped. The entire party had vanished. Because you have taken your friends for granted, called the hint naughty fairies, we have hidden them from you. But we like games. Guess who has given you each of these presents, and you'll have your friends back. The princess opened the first box. Inside was a torch. When it lit, revealed the truth. The princess said. Someone wanted to make sure I haven't gotten lost in the woods when it's dark, and I always see right from wrong. Which of my friends would give me the gift like that? She opened the second box. Inside there was a magical sword, which would leap right out of the bear's hands to defend them. Said the princess. Someone wants to make sure I am protected if I ever under threat. Which of my friends would give me the gift like that? She opened the third box. Inside there was a bag of coins that always provide money if there was something for the bearer they truly needed. Said the princess. Someone wants me to make sure I have money to buy food when I am hungry and clothes when I am cold. Which of my friends would buy me a gift like that? The princess thought about her friends and smiled certainly. Fairies? I have been thoughtless, but I appreciate all that my friends have given to me and all that they have done for me. She gave her answers, and the vexed fairies were forced to restore the party in a flash of colorful lights. One by one, she gave the animals a hug and thanked them for the presents, the party, and all they had done to help since she moved into the forest. And that is how the princess celebrated her first anniversary in the woods. And this is the answer to the door, too. The mom's door. The Goblins and the Ice Cave. Are we throwing ice balls at the bear? That's not very nice. Once upon a time, in a deep and ancient forest, the crafty goblins were playing near the glaciers when they discovered a hole in the ice. They crept through a gradually winding passage and found themselves inside a spacious ice cave. Light spilled down the underlying blue-white walls in a way that made them look like electric waterfalls, and a column made up of hundreds of icicles stood in the center. This was a time before the goblins had settled beneath the old wooden house, and they had nowhere to live. Perhaps we can live here, they exclaimed. Moments later, the sound of stomping feet interrupted their play, and they recognized that perhaps someone had already lived there. They hid behind the boulder to wait and see who was coming. The old bear sauntered into the cave, shaking powdery snow from his coat. He let out a giant yawn and lay down in the corner of the pile of tree branches, snoring within seconds. When they were sure he was deep asleep, the goblins conspired to clean the caves for themselves. They chipped away at the glacier until they had filled a bucket full of ice, then hid once more behind their boulder and started tossing chunks of it on the sleeping bear. Now, Old Bear is not the smartest creature in the forest, so when he woke up covered in ice, he roared, "My cave is collapsing!" Then he lumbered to his feet and ran outside before the whole thing could come down on top of him. The goblins crept out after him, did a loop, before coming back to find him sitting outside. "What happened?" they asked. "My cave is collapsing," boomed the old bear, "and it's time for me to hibernate. Where will I stay for the winter?" It had not occurred to the goblins that the old bear had settled in for the winter, and they felt a little bad, but they did not want the old bear to know that what they had done, so instead they offered to help him find a new den. Together they searched. They inspired countless stones and hollow trees and deeply pocketed knolls. Nothing they found was as beautiful as the ice cave, but the old bear settled on a packed earthen hollow that would keep him warm and dry for his long sleep. No, it's just the neighbors. "Good night," he yawned, and the goblins gleefully returned to their new home. In the spring, the old bear woke and went for a nice long walk to stretch his legs. His path took him right up to his old cave, where he heard the curious sound of laughter. Making his way inside, he was surprised to find the cave was intact, and the goblins were inside playing a game. "What is this?" he growled the old bear. The goblins stopped playing and looked ashamed. "We're sorry, old bear, but we had nowhere to live, and it's just so beautiful. We didn't realize you were about to hibernate, and then we couldn't bear to tell you what we had done." The old bear was angry at the trick, but the young goblins looked appropriately ashamed, and he said, "Come with me." He led the crafty goblins to the hollow in which he had hibernated for the winter. "You two can have this spot, and look, someone had built a big wooden house right over top of it. No one lives here then," said the old bear, "but one day maybe someone will." The earthen hollow was not as beautiful as the ice cave, but it kept the goblins warm and dry, and they were excited that someday they might have someone living overhead, someone who baked cakes and tolerated their mischief. And that's the story how the crafty goblins tried to steal the cave of the old bear, and how they got their own instead. Oh, tricksty. The Princess and the Two Thieves. Once upon a time, in an ancient and deep forest, there lived a wise princess in a deep wooden house. The house was built from a strong wood of the forest, and it kept the princess warm and safe. The princess was not a native of the forest, but she never spoke where she came from, for it made her cry. She did not have many friends, but that is how she liked it. The forest was big and deep, and many paths led to her house, but not many visitors passed by. The princess was happy to be left alone in the big house in the deep forest. She knew that the forest would provide for her, but that its generosity had to be respected, so she only took what she needed, and for a long time life was just fine for the princess in the big wooden house. One winter day, when snow blanketed the earth and ice bent the trees low, the wise princess realized that food was disappearing from her house. It was not much at first, only a few fruits and nuts and eggs vanishing during the night. "Maybe it's the birds," she said, "or the mice." And for the time, the princess was okay with losing some food, for winter was long and little critters needed to eat too. But then small items started to disappear as well, spoons and plates and forks and knives and blankets. It was as every time she was in one part of her house, something disappeared in another room. "That can't be the bird or mice," said the princess. "I think I have a thief." So she went outside to look for tracks in the snow and noise in the wind, but there was nothing to be found nor to be heard. "That's strange," said the princess. "Maybe the thief is hiding inside my house." For many days she hunted, looking behind the curtains and under the bed, in the attic, in the chimney, behind pools and under carpets, but she found nothing. And she searched. Food kept on disappearing night after night. "I will make a cake," frowned the princess. "A big cake with every egg and fruit and nut I still have, so that I only have one thing to keep my eye on." She spent the whole day making the cake and using everything she had left. The cake she made was so big she could hardly carry it. "If I manage to protect the cake, I will be able to survive a long winter," she said. So she added a lock to the oven, and she kept the big cake safe inside. But the next morning, the lock had been opened, and the cake had disappeared. At first, the princess cried because that cake was the last of her food until the snow melted. But then she noticed 2 trails of tiny feet in the spilled flour, and she followed the tracks to the hidden hatch in the floorboards. And that's how the princess realized the 2 tiny thieves were living under that wooden house right below her feet. See, this where everything's disappearing because we found their treasure underneath the house. The princess makes new friends. Once upon a time in an ancient deep forest, there lived a wise princess in a big wooden house. She had a living alone just fine for a very long time, until the day she noticed food and small items were disappearing from her house. The thieves went on and on until the day her last cake, which had been made with the last of her eggs and the last of her fruit, and the last of her nuts and the last of her flour, well, the last cake was stolen too, and all she found at the scene of the crime were 2 trails of tiny feet in the spilled flour, leading to a hidden hatch in the wooded floorboards. The princess did not try to open the hatch, nor did she try to break it. She was too tired and too hungry, and all she could do was cry in silence, alone in the big wooden house, hidden in the ancient and deep forest. She cried for a long time, until evening arrived, and then she cried some more. Suddenly a tiny voice came from under the house. "What is that noise you make?" it asked. "We do not like it, not one bit." "I'm crying because you 2 are mean to me. Whoever you are, you stole all the food I had, and I will starve before the end of this long, cold winter." The hatch opened just a peep, revealing 2 frowny faces pointing out from the darkness of the hidey hole. "But we're hungry too," said the second creature. "We've been hiding in this cave for a long time, and now winter is upon us and we need food." The princess dried her eyes and smiled at the 2 goblins. "If we are friends, we can share the cake you stole from me." The 2 thieves spat and smirked. "A friend? What is that?" The princess frowned, for she recognized the 2 tiny thieves were as lonely as she was. "A friend is someone you love and care for, someone you never hurt." "We never hurt each other, and we care for each other," said the goblins at the same time. "Does that mean we're friends?" "Yes, that's exactly it." "And if we're friends, you would not hurt us?" "Of course not. Friends trust each other." The goblins shook their little heads. "We trust no one, for no one trusts us." The words made the princess cry again, for now she understood the 2 creatures were not only as lonely as she was here in the big wooden house, but they had been lonely since they were born. "You are making that noise again," frowned the goblins. "Please stop that, for it makes us feel unhappy. Are you a witch? Is that some sort of magic?" "It makes you unhappy because we're friends," said the princess. "But we don't know you, and you're not like us. Sometimes friendship comes right away, even between friends who are very different." "Does that mean we can steal it from you no more?" "Yes, but that's what we do. We are crafty goblins who live under your house." "Well then, maybe we can arrange something. Is that what friends do?" "Yes, I believe they do." And that is how the princess met the crafty goblins and how they became friends. The Bear's Big Paws. You're very determined to pull every toy out, aren't you? Damn, dog, how many toys are you pulling out? Once upon a time in the deep and ancient forest, the old bear was out looking for a snack when he spied a bee's nest in the hole high up in a tree. The tree was dry and bilted, but the old bear was hungry, and so he made his way to the nest. But when he got there, he found his giant paw couldn't fit into the hole. Determined, he tried to force it inside, but the effort caused the branch below him to snap. The old bear tumbled to the ground and landed with a painful oof. He laid there stunned from the fall when all of a sudden something bit him. The bite was followed by another and another and another. Carpenter ants were swarming up his legs. You see, they had been nesting in the branch, and they did not appreciate being forced from their home. The old bear howled and jumped to his feet to dance around as he swatted and snapped, but his big paws couldn't do much for the tiny ants. When he finally managed to scrush or scare them all off, the old bear heard someone laughing. The curious goblins had seen the whole thing. "Clumsy old bear," they teased. "Those big paws aren't good at anything, are they?" Then they sped off, leaving Old Bear Pride hurting just as bad as his body. He lumbered through the forest, hungry and sad. "Maybe I'm just a clumsy old bear," he moaned, "and my big paws aren't good at anything." At that moment, the old bear heard a sad, sad noise. "What is that?" he wanted, and then he followed Oh, interesting. He followed the sound to where a mountain goat stood on top of a boulder high up in the hillside. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder if one of the kids changed the lines? Because you can clearly see there's something here that was written and somebody taped over it. Old bear!" she cried. "Old bear, please help, my kids are stuck." Sure enough, a tiny mountain goat was trapped inside of the stones, bowing sadly. The old bear began to walk towards them, then stopped. "I'm probably just going to make it worse," he thought. But then the goat kid started bowing even louder, and the old bear put away his fear. He climbed up to where the goat was trapped, and careful of where he stepped, trying not to think of how he had only just fallen out of a tree. Every then and now the ground would slide away from under his feet, but he kept going. When he reached the goat kid, he pulled his mighty paws against one of the boulders and began to push. At first it didn't budge, but he dug in and pushed even harder. Finally the boulders parted just enough to let the kid scramble to safety. The old bear released the boulder with a roar of triumph. "Roar! Thank you!" gusted Mama Goat, and she and her kid bounded off up the mountain. The old bear watched them with a smile and then made his way back down the hillside, wiggling his rump in triumph as he went. To his surprise, the crafty goblins waited at the bottom of the hill. "We saw the whole thing. We were wrong. You aren't just a clumsy old bear, and your paws are good for helping others." The old bear forgave the cubs for doubting him, because he had doubted himself just as much. He never again thought his paws were not good at anything, even though sometimes they weren't always great at everything. And that's how the old bear proved his heart was bigger than his paws. Once upon a time, in a deep and cold lake in the ancient forest, there lived an old seal who was a powerful witch in disguise. She was mean and cruel, and she liked nothing more than to swim in the deepest part of the lake, where the light was dim under the eyes, admiring the corpse of many victims she had tricked into the water over the years. She was so hateful that the only cold water of the lake could keep her cool. Her most prized possession was a tin mirror sold to her by the secret keeper, and she kept in the chest at the bottom of the lake. It was no ordinary mirror. If you looked into it, you would see a reflection of who you truly desired to be, and for 1 hour the mirror granted you the power to appear as that person. Whenever a boat or an unwise traveler approached the edge of the lake, the old witch used the mirror to appear as a beautiful woman she always wished to be, and with this disguise she allured the unfortunate sailor or wanderer into the deep and cold water. There, the old seal forced the victims to become part of her servant, and when she was done with them, they rejoined her collections of corpses in the deepest part of the lake. One day, when the old seal swam down to her den under the lake, she discovered that someone had stolen her mirror. The chest where she kept her most prized possession had been forced open, and now it was empty. Who would commit such a crime? Who dared to deprive her of her only treasure? The old seal went mad, and her hunger heated the water of the lake around her. For a time, everyone was happy with the temperature change, for the weather suddenly became sweeter and the air warmer. But after a few weeks, things started to get ugly. First, the fish began to die off, for they could not live in the hot water. Then the glacier began to melt, and the water of the lake rose and spilled out, flooding the forest and the meadows. And finally, the weather grew so hot that even the Ice King himself was awakened from his long slumber and decided to see what was going on. In the deepest part of the lake, he found the mad witch streaming about the corpse of her victim, so angry that the lake was about to boil. It only took a few minutes for the Ice King to understand what had happened, and demanded that the thieves present themselves before him. The thieves had no choice but to appear, for no one dared to disobey the Ice King. The crafty goblins presented themselves, mirror in hand. "Why did you steal the mirror?" said the king. "We were curious. We just wanted to see what really wanted to be," apologized the goblins. "But the stupid thing is broken. We look the same." "That does not mean it didn't work," smiled the Ice King. "Now apologize and give the mirror to me, for it is too powerful to be used by thieves or a mere old hag." The goblins apologized and gave the mirror to the Ice King, but the old seal was still angry. "And what about me?" she asked. "I've been deprived of my treasure, and I demand compensation." The Ice King frowned as he spoke. "Old hag, you are mean and cruel, but I concede that you have been wronged. For now you'll be allowed to leave the lake and walk the earth as a hag you really are, but only when the moon is full, and you, goblins, you had better stay from the lake, for I won't protect you from the moon hag's wrath." And this is how the two goblins faced the moon hag to change her name. Jeez. The goblins tricked the Mad Hunter. Okay. Once upon a time, in a castle just beyond the ancient and deep forest, the Mad Hunter was punished by the Golden Lady for failing to return the wise princess. "For your failure? Let's try that again, shall we? For your failure said the golden lady. I shall take your left hand. You return to the deep, ancient and deep forest, and hunt the wise princess. If you cannot bring me her back, I will return your hand to you. Fail again, and I will take your right hand. The mad hunter could hunt with just a right hand, but if he lost both his hands, he would never be able to hunt again, and would no longer be a mad hunter, but only a mad man. So the mad hunter returned to the ancient and deep forest, searching with his piercing eyes for the wise princess. The crafty goblins were out searching for mischief when they saw the Mad Hatter on the prowl. We can't let him find the princess, said the goblins, and so they devised a plan. It was wash day, and the princess had hung her beautiful dress out to dry. They stole it from the line and stuffed it full of straw, and then returned to where the Mad Hunter was scouring the path to the forest. As the Mad Hatter turned down the path that would have led him to the big wooden house, the goblin danced the straw princess in and out of view in the opposite direction. The ruse worked. The hunter fixed his piercing eyes on them and followed. Through the day and into the night, they led him away from the true princess, and as night fell, the crafty goblin realized the error of their plan. The Mad Hunter was now hunting them. If he caught him, he would not be kind. So they put their heads together to come up with a plan. It did not take them long to realize where they should go. They led the Mad Hunter to the edge of the deep and ice lake. And when he came into view, they weighed down the fake princess down with stones and dropped her into the freezing water, careful not to plunge into the depths themselves, lest the moon hag take her revenge on them. The Mad Hunter removed his clothes and dove in after the fake princess. He followed the shape of the sinking princess deep into the icy, chilled water, down below where ice covered the lake's surface. Finally, he caught her, but when he spun her towards him, he realized he had no head, and that her body was stuffed with straw, and then he felt a slippery brand brush his shoulder as the moon hag loomed overhead. The next morning, the princess went to receive her gown from the clothing line and found it was gone. She immediately expected the goblins of mischief and called, Goblins, did you take my gown? The goblins emerged from the cave and nodded sadly. Now what will I wear? Asked the princess, and angrily that she had lost her only dress. Let us explain, said the goblins. So they told the princess of the story of the Mad Hunter, and when they produced his clothes, which was a bit larger for the princess, but much warmer than her beautiful gown, she immediately forgave him. Thank you, my friends, for rescuing me and for these clothes, which will keep me much warmer in the winter than my beautiful gown. The Mad Hunter was forced to remain below the lake with the moon hag, but she did not kill him, because even reduced to just one hand, he was too useful a servant. Lo, he plotted the day he would emerge to once again hunt the wise princess and earn back his left hand. And that is the story of how the crafty goblin rescued the wise princess from the Mad Hunter. Ooh, we're halfway through. The Pelican helps her friends. Once upon a time, in a deep and ancient forest, an early winter storm blanketed everything in snow. It was so early in the year that the creatures of the forest were not yet ready for the original winter, much less a bad one, and everyone agreed the storm was a sign that the Ice King had plans for a long, cold winter. The princess had grown up in the kingdom where it was sunny all year round, and the goblins were very young, so no one in the big house knew how to prepare for such a winter. The house was not well insulated, and they did not have enough fuel or wood or food. Only the precise Pelican noticed their plight, and when it came time to fly south with the other birds, her heart was heavy with sadness. What can I do? She thought. I am a migration bird, and if I were to stay, who would look after my flock? The time it came to go, and the Pelican struggled to take flight. It felt as though a lead weight were stuck down the center of her chest. What can I do? She thought. I am a migration bird, and if I were to stay, who would look after my flock? She managed to take off, but only just barely, and flapping fiercely catch up with other birds. Blah. As the Pelican began her journey, the storm picked up, battling her to and fro. She had fallen well behind the flock, and she was already growing tired. But for all of her challenges in the air, she could tell things were much worse on the ground. A deep froze had settled over the forest. The leaded weight in her chest grew heavier as she thought of the princess and the goblins. What can I do? She thought. I am a migrate whatever, and if I were to stay, who would look after my flock? I don't know. Why don't you ask it a fourth time and see if I have an answer for you? The storm intensified, and the Pelican was in total whiteout. She knew she would have She should have despaired, but all she could feel was the weight, which had grown and grown until the thought she might drop out of the sky. She had felt called to help the princess and the goblins, but she had ignored it. I should have stayed, she thought. It was the right thing to do, and now I am lost with no way to make it right. Suddenly she was plucked from the sky and deposited in the hall of the Ice King. Pelican, you were flying in circles around my mountain. I was lost, she said, weighed down by the weight of guilt in my heart. The Ice King stared at her strangely. Is it guilt, or is it something else? Open your beak. He reached down inside her and pulled out a growing stone. The Pelican was surprised at how it had filled her with warmth, chasing away the cold in her down. You know what you must do, said the Ice King. Okay. The Pelican flew straight to the big wooden house. Snow had already blown in through the many cracks, and the ice crept across the wooden floor. She found the princess and the goblins herded in front of the quiet hearth and nearly frozen solid. No! She cried, and then placed the stone in the princess's lap. The warmth of it spread through the whole of the whole house, melting all that had frozen. The princess threw her arms around the Pelican's chest, and the goblins clinged to her legs. Thank you! They cried. You're welcome, the Pelican smiled in deep satisfaction. What is this? Asked the princess, staring at the wonderful stone. At first, I thought it was my guilt, but when the Ice King pulled it out of me, I realized it was something much more powerful. And just then, the storm broke, and the skies cleared, and the Pelican filled the big wood house letter with food from her beak. And then she took to the skies, lying by the knowledge that through her charity, everyone in the big wooden house would be warm and fed until spring. And that is the story of how the Pelican saved the wise princess and the crafty goblins from a long winter. Once upon a time, in a deep and ancient forest, the crafty goblin spied on the secret keepers as she made her rounds gathering up secrets that the animals of the forest had for sale. How does she get people's secrets? Do you suppose she peels them open Do you suppose she peels open their heads? Let's find out, said the second, and so the goblins watched the secret keeper. They watched her until the storm moose came to her, head hanging low. It was my fault. I chose the uneven trail. I cannot bear to remember. The secret keeper nodded and gazed into Moose's eyes. Though the goblins couldn't hear anything, they knew she was speaking to the moose, for the secret keeper spoke in their minds with the gift of voice. After a few minutes, the moose blinked. I feel lighter. Did I just give you something? The secret keeper nodded, handing him a coin. The moose nodded and plodded along down the trail. He spied the goblins hiding in the woods and narrowed his eyes, for he knew the goblins were often up to mischief. The two goblins whistled instantly, and the moose was forced to carry on because they weren't doing anything obviously bad. I need to know what that secret was, said one of the goblins. Let's go buy it. So the goblins approached the secret keeper before she could stow away Moose's secret. We want to buy Moose's secret. What do you have to trade? Asked the secret keeper, her voice filling their minds. The goblin produced a silver-handled brush they had stolen from the princess, and the secret keeper nodded. And this is how the goblins came to know the moose's mate had tumbled down the cliffside to her death. Wow! The secret keeper moved on. The first of the goblins said, I want to know more. So the goblins followed the secret keeper, hoping to find where she hid the secrets. They followed her to the peak of a nearby ridge and watched as she stowed the rest of the day's secrets high in the clouds. Where she had gone, they climbed as high as the spruce tree that disappeared into the misty sky. They reached out and just managed to dip their hands into the clouds. Their heads were filled with memories, and they snatched their hands back out as if they had just thrust them into boiling water. Tears poured down their cheeks. That was how the secret keeper found them, crying in the tree. You stole my secrets, seethed the secret keeper. Give them back. The crafty goblins stopped crying because they saw an opportunity. What will you give us in exchange? They said. I will give you back all the silver-handed brush, offered the secret keeper. For so many secrets? Psh, you'll have to offer more than that. What if, the secret keeper, I shared the gift of voice? The crafty goblins grew excited. That will do. So the secret keeper shared the gift of the voice with the goblins, and immediately they found that they could hear one another's thoughts and feel each other's feelings. The crafty goblins gave back the secrets they had taken and ran back to the big wooden house. There they found the princess preparing food. They tried to peer into her mind, but they found it was blank. They tried to speak with her only using their mind, but she could not hear them. It seemed the secret keeper was craftier than the crafty goblins, for she only shared enough of her power to let the goblins use the gift of voice with each other, and not with the whole forest. And that is how the goblins stole the gift of voice from the secret keepers, and how they could use it with each other. Which then we use in a game because we can feel each other's emotions, and speak to each other, and see each other's memories. Once upon a time, in an ancient and deep forest, there lived a big frog in the small pond. She was no ordinary frog, for she had been given the gift of speech when she saved the princess from the mad hunter. From the morning to evening she did everything the other frogs did, except she knew how to speak. Everyone in the forest could hear her loud voice, and everyone was unhappy with that, because she never stopped blabbing. She blabbed about the too hot sun, and the too deep pond, and about the rain to come, and all the delicious flies she had eaten. Across the forest all creatures tolerated the endless noise, until one day they could not deal with it any more. They asked the big frog to quiet down. "I cannot," said the big frog. "This is what I do. Before the princess kissed me, I croaked all day long, and you all liked that I did. This is the same, except you can understand what I say, and now you find it irritating? But I cannot change what I am, can I? Can you?" All the creatures agreed that she was right, and that this was rude of them to ask the big frog to stop doing what she had always done. So they returned to their own parts of the forest and let the big frog do what frogs always do, jumping and talking some more, and about the too hot sun and the too deep pond, about the rain to come and the delicious flowers they had eaten. After the time it was all right, but in the forest, wood travels fast and everyone has a story to tell. Big Frog was being who she was, gossiping about everything she ever heard. She told the bees that the old bear had stolen their precious honey 2 years ago. She told the beavers that the eagles had stolen their precious wood. She had told the deer who had killed her fawn. She had told all the tall spruce trees who had caved a curse word onto its back. Once again, everyone in the forest asked the Big Frog to keep quiet, for now everyone had a grudge against everyone else. But once again, the Big Frog would not listen. "When I was just a frog, you never paid attention to me. When nobody helped me when the mad hunter hunted me for sport. This is only right for the wrong, and I won't stop talking." The fuss went on, and noise so loud that the Ice King himself woke inside to see what was going on. "Silence!" he bawled the king. Even the big frog stopped babbling. Once the forest was quiet again, the Ice King patiently listened to what each and every animal in the forest had to say, till finally he made his decision. "Big Frog, you have abused the gift of speech, for you only use it to get revenge. Despite knowing that words can be hurtful, you throw them around without caution, and you too cause too much trouble." The Big Frog opened her mouth to protest, but the Ice King raised his finger before she could say another word. "Since you have received the gift of speech for a good deed, I would not dare take it away from you. So here is your punishment. I will tell you the biggest of my secret. It is a secret so powerful and so dangerous that it will frighten you. But if you ever reveal it to anyone..." The Ice Cream bit down. The Ice Cream. The Ice King bent down and whispered such a pertinent words in the Big Frog's ear that the poor creature started to tremble. "Now go on about your business, all of you, and try to forget what the Big Frog told you, for you are living in the forest and you have nowhere else to go." And that's how the Big Frog irritated the Ice King and how she was punished. Great. That's what you do. Silence! Once upon a time, in a deep and ancient forest, winter gave way to spring and a sudden burst of warm air that melted all the snow and all the ice all at once. The river swelled until it could no longer hold all the water in, and then it spilled out to create new rivers in places where no one was expecting them. The whole of the forest went into panic, looking for shelter from the rising waters. The very old Beaver had been working on a dam when one of the new rivers came rushing right at her. She screeched and squealed, but whenever direction she ran, more water appeared. She was caught in the flooding, and though she had once been an excellent swimmer, age had taken its toll, and so the rushing water carried her off speed she could not control. "Help!" she called. Crafty goblins had been running back to their cave under the big wooden house when they heard the beaver's cry. "We have to help the beaver," the goblin said. "You go on one way and I'll go the other." They ran, keeping in touch with the gift of voice. Finally, one of them spotted her, twisting and tumbling in the river, but she was on the opposite side of the water, and the goblins could not reach her. "Brother!" the sister goblin cried out through the gift of voice. "I see her, but I cannot get to her. Maybe you can?" "I'll try." The goblin guided her brother so that he would hit the river just at the right spot to reach the beaver. The plan worked, and soon the second goblin appeared in the right spot. "Beaver!" he shouted, holding out a branch. "Grab hold of this!" The beaver grabbed it, but in her panic pulled the goblin too. "No!" cried his sister. She ran as hard as her legs could go, managing to outspace the river and get ahead of the beaver and her brother. Searching for some means of getting them out, she spied a low-hanging branch. They zipped by quickly, but if they were fast enough... "Brother!" she cried through the gift. "You are coming up on a low-hanging branch. You'll zip by quickly, but if you're fast enough..." "Got it!" said the brother. And then he said to the beaver, "Get ready to grab the hold of the low-hanging branch. We're going to zip by, but if we're fast enough..." Oh my god, quit. That's my pet peeve. You literally just said that. There's no word count. You don't need to repeat, okay? Suddenly they were right in front of it and reached out, snagging hold. Though the water beat against them, trying to shake them loose, they pulled themselves along the branch and back to dry land. When they were all safe, the very old beaver thanked the goblins. But how, she asked, how did you know just where to find me? And how did you know the branch was coming? The goblins just stared a secret smile. Just lucky, I guess. And that is how the goblins saved the very old beaver from the flooding grunt and how she never knew how they did it. And also, she's dead. Why is she back? I guess it could be a different beaver. I'm assuming there's not only one beaver. Ugh. Also, it's interesting here too that she does call him brother. Because if it is written about Allison and Tyler, they were sisters before. So it's interesting that there's a brother and sister goblin in this. Once upon a time, in a deep and ancient forest, the crafty goblins were getting into all kinds of trouble. They had woken up in a particularly mischievous mood that day, and there was not a single city of ancient forest who did not manage to pull a plank on. They left a mud pie in the princess's kitchen, so when she dug in, she got a big full... Couldn't you have told? They used the paint to draw silly pictures all over Moose's antlers while he slept. They told the muskrat that his coat had been returned to its former glory, which made him very sad when he rushed to the water's edge and found he was in fact still mangled. They stole branches from the old bear's den in order to have a sword fight. They filled the old bear's den with burrs. Every time they ran away in a fit of giggles, never stopping to say that rather jokes had done any harm. They were on their way to fill the Pelican's beak full of pebbles when they were hoisted into the air by their legs. Though they thrashed and shouted, they found themselves staring into the face of the Ice King. All morning I have been hearing complaints about you two. They're just pranks, said the goblins. No one has really been hurt. Oh no, said the Ice King, and he forced them to see how each of his victims of their pranks were doing. The princess had a stomachache from swallowing the mud. The moose's antlers itched terribly where the paint had touched them. The muskrat was crying, sad at being reminded what his violent had cost him. The old beaver's den was flooded, and the old bear was trying to get burrs out of his fur, but finding most of them hopelessly tangled. For your punishment, you must help each of them undo the harm you caused. If you do a good enough job of this, there will be no further punishment. If you do not, you will have to give me your noses so they will no longer stick them into other people's business. Now the goblins liked their nose right where they were in the middle of their face, so they set about making things right. They baked a real pie for the princess and brewed her a tea that would settle her stomach. They scrubbed the moose's antlers clean and then covered them in the soothing mud. They sat by the river with the muskrat, listening as he talks in great detail about his old coat, and then they did their best to point out all the things that were still handsome about him, like his proud whiskers and sparkling eyes. They let the very old beaver rest while they repaired all the damage done to her den, and then finally they removed every burr from the old bear's fur, even the ones that were hopelessly tangled. In the end, they came before the Ice King to see if they had done enough. The Ice King surveyed the forest and found that everyone seemed back to normal. What did you learn? That our pranks can make people feel bad. Yes, actions have consequences. In case you forget, I'm going to leave you with a reminder. Whenever one of your prank is going to hurt someone, you are going to feel a little pit in your stomach. That will be your punishment and your warning. So every time after that, goblins set out to do a prank that went a little too far, they felt a little prick in their stomach, and they were forced to consider rather it's the right thing to do. And that's how the goblins irritated the Ice King, and how they were punished. Oh, this one too has the different writing over it. What was the other one that had it? It's the bear one, right? Yeah, this one. Huh. I wonder if this means anything. Once upon a time, in a deep and ancient forest, there lived a pair of crafty goblins in a cave below a big wooden house. They lived with a wise princess who shared as much food with them as she was able, but it was never quite enough. This left the goblins hungry, and very hungry, always hungry. One day they were out foraging for food. The pelican landed on a rock and dumped a smorgasbord from her beak, which the goblins knew was magic and never empty. There were king crabs in red, blue, and gold, and scarlet. Very blue shrimp, pink shelled scalpels, bolong brown clams, purple spiny urchins, and even one prickly red sea cucumber. The food just kept coming. They watched as Pelican ate one clam and then took a nap. Do you think she would mind if we just took just a little? Said the Goblin to the other. Her beak never empties. She wouldn't possibly miss a couple of crabs, said the second, licking her lips. They were agreed, so they crept over, flinched some crabs, and ran. The Goblin scarfed the crabs, but when they finished, they found that they were still hungry. She wouldn't miss a handful of shrimp, said the Goblins to the other. The Goblins scarfed the ship, but when they finished, they found that they were still hungry. Maybe also a few scallops, said the Goblin to the other. The Goblins scarfed the scallops, but when they were finished, they found that they were still hungry. So they went back for clams, and then oysters, and then finally even the sea cucumber. Finally, they were not hungry, but there's also nothing left. Just then the Pelican woke up. What happened to my food? She asked, unable to lie about it. The Goblins confessed their crime, and the Pelican was dismayed. But she was a charitable-hearted bird, and she could tell the crafty Goblins were little creatures. Goblins, I will share my food with you, but you must, in return, follow my example and be gracious with others as I am with you. Take that to heart, and I will consider your debt paid. But we have nothing to give, said the Goblin. You have your nimble hands and your crafty brains and your loving heart, said the Pelican. The crafty Goblins realized how much they had to give, and for the rest of the day they looked for ways to help other creatures of the forest. They found the moose struggling with an itch, hard-to-reach spot on his back, and so they climbed up and gave it a good scratching. Next, they helped the old bear who could not have gotten the honey out of a hollow beehive. They climbed on top of the tree with the hive and dumped it, cracking it open. Finally, they found the princess crying over the loss she would not speak about. So they wrapped their little arms around her in a great big hug and stayed until she felt better. When they were done, they returned to the Pelican. Does it feel good to help us grow as I am? Said the Pelican. It did! Oh, I'm glad, said the Pelican. We all have problems that we cannot solve on our own, but if everyone goes about with curiosity in their hearts, then there's always someone someone on hand to help. But we all must commit to do so, and there may be no one there to help you when you need it. This made sense to the Goblins, and they thanked the Pelican for their food and their lesson. Of course, by this time they were hungry again, and that remained an ongoing problem until the day the moose taught them how to fish. But that's another story. And that is how the Pelican forgave the crafty Goblins, and how she taught them charity. Once upon a time, in an ancient and deep forest, the crafty Goblins were awake long after they should have been asleep. One Goblin said to the other, "Let's go exploring the forest." Now the Goblins were not in the habit of exploring the forest late at night, where they did not know they would be found. But this did not scare them off. They crept out of the beds, bundled up, and went exploring. It was dark. The light of the moon was just enough to keep them from walking into trees, but they could not see more than 15 feet in front of them. Every time a twig snapped or branches rustled, they considered turning back, but they didn't, and so they had ventured far beyond the house into the part of the forest where they were not familiar with. And when they realized the snapping of twigs and the rattling of branches had become steady, something was following them. They turned to run, but a hulking figure emerged from the darkness, swooping them up with a giant hand and stuffing them into a burlap sack. The Goblins wiggled and cried out, but the sack remained shut as their captor stomped through the forest, singing, "Whittly-dee-dum, whittly-dee-dee, in the bag some milk for me." After a lot of thundering and stomping, the bag opened and the Goblins were dumped into a giant iron pot full of warm water. And a huge troll stood overhead with a grinning down at them through the very bushy white eyebrows. "I am the ice troll, and you are my dinner." He ready to cook the Goblin, saying, "Whittly-dee-dum, whittly-dee-dee, there's soon to be soup for me." Finishing his diddle, he bent down to stroke the fire beneath the pot and let out a loud nose of pain, rubbing a spot on his back that always ached. The troll stood proud and walked over to the top shelf where he began to chop potatoes. One of the Goblins had an idea. She whispered to the brother, "Follow my lead." The Goblin stretched out in the water, floating and let out a sigh of content. "Ah," said one of the Goblins, "this is the most relaxed I've ever been. My body feels so good. I think I could run 100 miles without stopping," said the second. Troll peered at them. They weren't supposed to be happy about being in a cooking pot, but they clearly looked like they were. "Troll," said the Goblins, "if your back is hurting, you should try sitting in the water, just for a little bit before it gets too hot." Troll stumped over. "But if I take you out, then you will escape and there'll be no soup for me." "Put us back in the sack, then we cannot run away." This made sense to the troll. The spot on his back that always ached was still bothering him, and the Goblins couldn't go anywhere if they were trapped, so he stuffed the Goblins back in the sack and climbed into the soup pot. He stretched out and let out a sigh of content. Meanwhile, the Goblins threw themselves around the sack until it began to swing. The troll was so relaxed he didn't even notice. The bag dropped onto the shelf where the troll had been chopping potatoes, and the goblins pushed up against the edge of the troll's knife, showing a hole. Then they made a break for it. The troll finally noticed what they were doing and roared out in anger, but he was so relaxed that when he tried to chase them, he tumbled out of the cooking pot and into the flames, catching his bruised eyebrows on fire. Goblins ran and ran as fast as they could through the ancient and deep forest until they were back in their caves, safe and in their beds. They vowed never to venture out in the ancient deep forest late at night again, for they did not think they'd get so lucky to trick the ice troll twice. And that's the story how the crafty goblins met the ice troll and why they never did again. Are you pushing the muskrat? That is so mean! Once upon a time, in a deep and ancient forest, there lived a muskrat. The muskrat was a lazy and cowardly creature. He did little but lay around the sun, cleaning his beautiful coat until it shone. One day, the muskrat found the crafty goblins playing king of the mountain on his favorite rock. He was too cowardly to confront them directly, and so he retreated to a safe distance and then pressed his stone right at the hornet's nest hanging overhead. One of the goblins saw him do it, but before she could say anything, the hornets emerged fierce and chasing the goblins away, stinging them. With the rock empty, the muskrat claimed a spot. When the goblins returned and asked the muskrat, "Why did you do that?" "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, turning away to ignore them. Goblins knew that the muskrat cared nothing but his coat, so they devised to steal it in order to teach him a lesson. As the muskrat lay in the sun, he spied the goblins strolling about. Their skin was covered in flakes of gold. "Goblins! What happened to your skin shine that way?" "We were attacked by the hornets. We ran and ran until we found a pool by the glacier. We dove in and came out this way. Would you show me this pool?" The crafty goblins led the muskrat to a pool. The muskrat looked at the pool suspiciously. "It looks like a pool," he said, and the goblins chuckled and shrugged. "You don't have to jump in if you don't want to. But what do you lose if you try? And if it works, why, you will be the most beautiful creature in the whole of the forest." With the vision of his splendid coat in mind, the muskrat jumped in. When he emerged, he was disappointed to find that nothing had changed. Maybe you have to be stung by the hornets first, just like us." The muskrat hesitated because being stung would be painful. Seeing his hesitation, the guy asked, "If it works, you'll be the most beautiful creature in the whole of the forest." The muskrat decided it was worth it, so he turned to the hornet's nest, punched a stone right at it. The hornets emerged, even more fierce this time. They chased the muskrat, stinging him repeatedly until he jumped into the magical pool. The muskrat was disappointed to find once again nothing had changed. "I wonder if the magic only works for us. Would you like me to jump in with your coat?" The muskrat hesitated. "If it works, you'll be the most beautiful creature in the whole of the forest." He slipped it off and handed it to the goblins. Without his coat, the muskrat was pale and covered in scabbed welts. Instead of jumping in the pool, one of the goblins ran away with the coat, laughing. The other pushed muskrat into the frozen pool, and as water splashed the goblin, the golden flakes ran, revealing that they had only ever been painted on. The muskrat cried so painfully and made such a clamor that he woke the Ice King, who came down the forest to see what had happened. When the Ice King saw the muskrat, he laughed, only fearing the creature other. "Tell me what happened," said the Ice King. Both the muskrat and the goblins told their side of the story. The Ice King stated the case before him. "It's true that the muskrat's vain and he thinks nothing but himself," considered the Ice King, "but he needs something to keep him warm in the winter and the snow." So the Ice King has decided the muskrat would get his coat back, but it'd be patchy and unkept. After that day, he was known as the Muggle Muskrat, and that's how the goblins tricked the muskrat into giving up his coat and how he got his name. Sona, are you playing nice with that puppy? Oh, Lordy, you've causing trouble? Get her, Molly. You get her. Once upon a time, in a deep and ancient forest, the crafty goblins were hungry. That wasn't unusual, the goblins were always hungry, but today they were particularly hungry. They opened the wise princess's cabinets to look for a snack, but all they had was a small pile of nuts and berries and just one strip of dried fish. The goblins grabbed it all and clambered up, but they were still hungry. They went out into the woods to look for more to eat. First, they dropped by the small pool. The big frog was asleep, and besides the pool was a pile of insects she had caught for eating after she woke up. The goblins crept up to the pile, careful not to wake the big frog. As they got close, she rabbit loud and they froze, but the frog kept sleeping. So they grabbed the pile of insects and gobbled it up, but they were still hungry. Here it is again. I want to know what's underneath it. As they crept back into... Oh, I wonder if it's going to be, like, ripped off later on in the story. Like, I wonder if there's going to be, like... if they're gonna see this and they're like gonna be like, what is actually like underneath this? What's the actual story? As they crept back into the woods, they found the moose watching them. Did you just steal the big frog's food? The goblin tried to look guilty but failed. She said we could have them. Oh, really? But so I will ask her. So the moose woke up Big Frog and asked, did you say the goblins could have your food? Big Frog looked at the goblins, and he knew were always hungry, and nodded. Yes, I did. Really? The frog nodded, and the moose sighed. All right then, he said, and let the goblins go. The next stop was the river. They watched as the old bear swept at a larging salmon, catching it driftily in his large paws. He laid it out upon a rock and left it to dry, lumbering back into the woods to seek out some berries. The crafty goblins crept up to the rock carefully in case of the old bear's return. They reached the rocks, grabbed the salmon, and gobbled it up, but they were still hungry. As they crept back into the woods, the moose was once again waiting for them. Are you going to tell me the old bear said you could have that? Yes. Old Bear roamed up at the moment, and Moose asked him, did you leave that fish for the goblins? Old Bear looked at the goblins, who knew were always hungry, and said, I did. Really, the moose said. Really, the old bear. After the moose, the old bear said to Goblin, be sure to tell the princess I was kind to you, and don't steal my fish again. Goblin, still hungry, went out looking for one more meal. They crept up to the muskrat lodge and began to climb inside when they were dragged back out. The moose dangled them by the seats of their pants and said, now, I know Muskrat didn't tell you that you could eat his food because he blames you for his coat being ruined. Besides, he barely has enough for himself and doesn't share with anyone. The goblins began to protest, but he shook his head, set the goblins down and said, come with me. The goblins followed the moose to part of the river where the ran slow enough for them to walk in safely. He gave them each a fishing line and said, I'm going to teach you to fish, so that when you are hungry, you do not need to steal from an animal of a forest. It'll be hard work, but it'll be honest. The crafty goblins were not against working hard. They were just hungry, and so they listened to the moose and soon were pulling fish out of the river. They ate them up, and finally they were no longer hungry. And that's how the moose came to teach the goblins to fish. Once upon a time, in a deep and cold lake near the ancient forest, there lived an old seal who was a powerful witch. After angering the Ice King, she had been bound to the lake, allowed only to venture out when the moon was full, and only looking with the old hag she truly was. For years she had dreamed of vengeance, all alone within a deep lake among the corpses of her many previous victims. One night she woke to see the black and hooded silhouette crawling to reach a beautiful gown full of stone. The human had dived far deep into the lake than any land dweller should have been able to go. His tense and ferocity impressed the moon hag. She decided he'd be wasted in her sanctuary of corpse. She used her magic to enspell him, allowing him to breathe underwater, but also binding him to her service. You will be the instrument of my release and my revenge, for you and I together will kill the Ice King. The moon hag had never heard of the Mad Hunter, and she did not know how powerful he willed. She could only tell he was a hunter, and her thirst for revenge had blinded her to the threat he posed. She gifted him a hand of ice, which was not as nimble as the hand of flesh, but allowed him to serve as her better no hand at all. The moon hag spent years dividing a perfect plan to kill the Ice King, and years more putting all the pieces into place to execute it. In the meantime, the Mad Hunter served her, guarding her treasures and plotting his own plots. Finally, everything was prepared. The moon was risen, and the moon hag stepped on land, giddy at the thought that she would never have to leave again if it did not please her. She brought the Mad Hunter to his post, a enduring peak of ice and stone from which he would loose the arrow that would slay the Ice King. Before she could go, he put forth a proposal. Moon hag, if you grow back my missing hand, I would be certain to hit the Ice King with my arrow. We only have one shot, and I would hate to miss. You are a powerful witch, so you'll be able to craft ties to bind me to the place that I could not break. The moon hag considered it. All right, I will grow back your hand, and then bind you here at the ties that will not break. She cast a spell, and the Mad Hunter's hand of ice was replaced with a hand of flesh. As the witch left to complete the next part of her plan, the Mad Hunter grinned wickedly in the moonlight. After a short time, the Mad had returned, lowering the Ice King into the Mad Hunter's line of sight. What's all this about, moon hag? Said the Ice King. Many years you have bound me to the lake. Many a year I have been alone in the dark. That ends tonight. She cast a powerful spell that made the Ice King slow to react. And then she gave a signal. Mad Hunter! Let your arrow fly. Nothing happened. She twitched nervously. Mad Hunter! Let your arrow fly. Still nothing happened. The Ice King, meanwhile, was striding towards her slowly but fiercely. The moon had fled, racing to the first ragged peak of ice and stone where a servant should have waited. But the peak was empty. The ties had been broken, and the Mad Hunter was gone. For the end, he was more powerful than the two, especially once he had two hands. When the Ice King finally caught up to the old hag, his furious voice could be heard throughout the forest. For your wickedness, you will be eternally bound to the lake. You will no longer be allowed to leave, not even under a full moon. The moon hag was imprisoned in the lake, and she never again tried to escape. And that's how the Mad Hunter escaped the moon hag, and that's how he got his left hand back. And that's the end of the book. Some of these title screens has an OA on it. like here. Some of them have this. So I wonder if this is supposed to be Ollie and Allison. Like these are the ones that they wrote. And then these are the ones. Oh, so I wonder, is this the one that has it? Yeah. So I wonder if they wrote something and the mom went over it with a different thing. Because like this one doesn't have a name attached to it. So I wonder if the mom wrote this. Yeah, so this one is Ollie and them, so they wrote that one. This one doesn't have the initials though, and this one has the markings all over it, the tape. I don't know. It's gonna be interesting to see if we ever figure out like what's underneath here. Like maybe that, like I was saying, that's something like in the story it'll be like, oh, you need this story to figure out another puzzle or something, and we have to rip these off to get like the right story. But yeah, it's interesting too, like these ones clearly are written by someone else than what like this one is, because there's no initials here. And I don't know if like if the kids were doing it for this, why they wouldn't do it for like all of them, you know? But anyways, so that is the book. The very long book. Ugh. But yeah, so that's it. That's the entire book. We will never have to read that entire thing again unless, like I said, unless it comes out for the puzzle. But then that's just one and we can skim it instead of actually reading it. But it's interesting because, yeah, I'm wondering, why do some of them have initials and some don't? Why do some have them like taped over to where it's a completely different thing that they're saying? And some of it, like, I still wonder if some of them, like the muskrat and stuff, I wonder if like the muskrat is Sam. And then like maybe the Ice King is the sheriff. That would kind of make sense. But I wonder, like, I don't know, like the Pelican could be Trisha, because she's always giving food and Trisha was always giving food to them. The old bear, I don't know. Well, and we might not have met everyone yet because we just finished chapter 1. But anyways, I'm very interested in how like this book, because it's such a long book and there's so many stories in it. I wonder if it does play more later on, because it played into opening the door. So I wonder if it'll play in at a later date. But anyways, that's the entire book. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you made it here to the end, leave a book down below and I'll know that you listened to me read the entire thing. But thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you guys later.